I will take you with me. You might learn something.
About soccer?
Nah, mate. Not about soccer. And for fuck's sake, stop saying soccer!
To me, I'm fascinated, as you say, about this fork in the road. You know, I am basically witnessing history firsthand. This is, it's amazing to be part of that. I think that Poland has carved quite a big name on the hooligan league ladder, let's say, you know, and I think that's utterly warranted. The violence still plays a massive role, you know, and I think that one of the telling differences between the British scene and the Polish scene is that these guys are training for it. You know, this is a 24/7 life. This is every one of them is a member of a MMA club or a gym, and these are the recruiting grounds even.
Welcome back from the winter holidays. During those days, when I grew up, my hometown of Graz in Austria had this like indoor 5-on-5 soccer tournament that they hosted, where all the big clubs of the region would field teams, including the first league teams, so Sturm and GRK. It was right after Christmas, and it would be live on TV, and it was a big deal. I missed that tournament during that season. Way too high of an injury risk for today, I suppose. Well, we traveled pretty far east today, the farthest we have gone. Just a few weeks ago, Poland elected a new parliament, and the result was a change of power from the national conservative camp to the centrist pro-European camp. And the campaign yet again highlighted, to use an overused term, the culture wars over defining the future of Poland, one of the European Union's largest but also newest member states. Historically occupied by its neighbors over and over again, risen from the Eastern Bloc, riven between this historically very national Catholic identity and the fast pace of capitalism and Westernization, between skepticism toward those changes, but also deep antagonism towards Russia in the East, Poland, it seems, is constantly at a historical crossroads. And its soccer culture, so says our visiting professor for the day, highlights that. Simultaneously behind, as well as ahead of the curve of the rest of the continent, here lies an often still undiscovered football landscape of dramatic change, of shady business, physical violence in the stands, combined with often new stadiums, and also a lack of success on the field and in European tournaments. Intrigued yet? So we journey into the heart of Europe with Alex Weber. Alex is a British journalist who has lived in Poland a long time and has made it his passion to chronicle the history that is unfolding before his eyes in the media that he works in and on his own blog. Before we listen, don't forget to leave a star rating in the podcast app of your choice if you haven't done so. That really helps visibility, especially for a niche podcast such as this one. Or tell a friend who is interested in a different kind of soccer coverage. That also helps even more. And or leave me a voicemail through the link in the show notes. It's 2 clicks away for feedback, for topic suggestions, or just greetings. And I'll be happy to play those on the air. I don't know if those help, but it would certainly make me happy if I hear from you as well. On we go. East to Poland. Welcome, Alex. You're the visiting professor for today. I normally ask guests what their journey is into football, what their journey is into the story they're working on. With you, given the country we're talking about, Poland, and giving the fact that it's relatively obscure, especially for many American football fans, I think, that listen to this, I wonder if you could start us off with a case for why we should spend a whole hour on football culture in Poland to begin with.
I think that my immediate response to that would be essentially because it's crazy. You know, it is like nothing you anticipate. I think that I have to forewarn anyone interested in football itself. Polish football is terrible as an actual sport. From that perspective, don't bother. You know, really, you're always wasting your time. But from the fan scene perspective, I think it's got one of the most intriguing fan scenes there is. I think that it stands several levels above what we have in England. It doesn't even bother the compare. It's not worth the comparison. Almost, it's that different. I think that with Poland as well, we're at such a crossroads, we're such a fork in the road in terms of where the game is, in terms of the fan scene. It reminds me a little. I say don't make comparisons. I will make swiftly a comparison. I would almost put it against English football in the 90s when English football was kind of had that that sort of that crossing the Rubicon moment where it went to the stadiums were changing, the TV coverage was changing, the country's culture was changing. And I think Poland is very much at that sort of fork where it's gone from the dark ages to all of a sudden fifth gear forward to the future. So we're kind of at that stage in Poland, which makes it a very, very fascinating time to live in. It does feel, to be honest, every season feels like, something has changed, something has happened, a step has been taken, several steps have been taken. It's not like England where it feels almost a tired slog, where flatlining almost. You can feel the progress being made in Poland, and personally I'm not a fan of progress in football. I'm old school, and I'm a nostalgist. I like I like the old stadiums, I like the cavemen sort of feeling of football. So for me it's a bad thing. And to be honest though, I love how you've still got these grasps of the old in Poland. There is still this real sort of struggle against going down the gentrification road, for want of a better word. So I think it's a really fascinating time to be involved in Polish football.
I think that's convincing, and it overlaps with the bigger historical picture too. Poland has been at quite a few forks in the road in terms of European and, in fact, world history over the last 100+ years as well. And I'm sure that shows in how fan culture plays out as well. In how questions of infrastructure and of global engagement play out. And I'm sure we'll get to that down the road as well. But now let me ask you actually about you. What's your journey, A, into football, and B, into Poland?
This how long's a piece of string, basically. I could go on forever, and I would love to go on forever. But basically, with football itself, I got into football with Italia 90. I was one of those seduced by the whole magic of it, and I was about 13 years old when Italia 90 happened, and the whole romance of the tournament. Exactly, yes. And the whole romance of that tournament has been documented, how it impacted English people. It was such a seminal moment for us. And when the World Cup finished, it made sense to basically go down my local club, which is Bristol City. And from there, again, love at first sight is going to be the phrase I overuse, but there you go. And so, yeah, just everything to do with football, home and away with Bristol City, devouring everything in the press about football. It was football, football, football. And I think, when you're at that age of 13, 14, you're very susceptible to things. Some people get into bands or whatever, or collecting vinyl or whatever, and other people focus on playing sports or watching sports in my case,
Yeah, you picked your subculture. It was the same for me.
Exactly,
around
exactly.
that age.
Yeah. Nailed it. Yeah, totally. And football was mine. And but with how did I come to be in Poland? That was the next step. I basically flunked out of university, and kind of reached a dead end in my life. Couldn't get a decent job, let's say, in England. So was basically traveling around Europe a lot and stuff like that. And it was while doing that, while I was backpacking, I came across a magazine to the old a city guide magazine to various cities and behind the former Iron Curtain. I remember when I was on the train thinking, where do I get back to England? I'm just going to fire off a CV. And so obviously lied through my teeth and all that. It would never work nowadays in this, in what happened, the way things are now, but in those days, come on over to Vilnius. And so I ended up in Vilnius in Lithuania. And they basically liked my work, but they didn't like me. So I got shipped off to Warsaw, to the new office they were founding there.
We should say briefly, what is your profession? What do you do for work?
I work in media. I'm a lifestyle journalist, basically. Okay. So, essentially I started off in this part of Europe writing travel guides, and that's I still do a lot of that, but strayed more into mainstream media and such like now. But yeah, when I came to Warsaw, it was because no one else wanted to live here or work here from from foreigners anyway. But I fell in love with the city. It was dark and sleazy and stuff like that. But as a 24-year-old guy, perfect, So for me, it got me straight away, and hence I remain here.
When was that? When did you first?
That was 2000. So okay. Yeah, 23 years ago.
Yeah. And then you started attending football matches and fall in love with Polish football right away? Or did it take you quite a while to put up what you have today, which is an expansive, extremely well-documented blog with social media presence as well, obviously influenced by your journalism skills? Did that hit you right away when you moved to Poland? Or did it take a little while to fall in love?
It took more than a little while, It took several years. When I first moved to Poland, I was essentially a typical Brit, more than happy just to spend every night in the expat pub, watching the football from England and stuff like that, drinking with my new mates and going crazy and stuff like that. And when I did start, obviously there would be times I'd poke my nose into Polish football, and without a guiding hand, essentially, I just kept on picking the wrong games. I'd go to a game where there'd be a fan boycott, and I'd literally be sitting, with about 30 other fans in silence, in cemetery-like silence. And this kind of run of bad luck happened for years and years. And it was only really about 7 or 8 years ago when the bug caught me again, when essentially I went to a game that really struck a chord with me, and after that I was off. I just basically got a new dog at that time, so for no other reason than to document her growing up, I got a camera, and this coincided with me going to football. I just thought, put two and two together, brought the camera to football, and everything snowballed, and it was it was all just these circumstances colliding together and taking me down blind alleys that there was no map, there was no idea in my head, there was no light bulb moment where I thought, right, I'm going to get into Polish football and do a blog, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. No, it was all just accident after accident, let's say.
Do you recall what game that first game was? And why it hit?
Yeah, it was the first game where the magic switch flipped. Really, again, there's kind of not particularly an intriguing story behind it, but I had a work trip to the town of Lublin, booked up in, I think, about 2015 or 2016 it was, and the trip got called off at the last moment, but I'd already paid for my hotel. I figured why not? I like Lublin. So I went down there anyway for 4 days, 5 days or whatever. And it's a beautiful city, Lublin. But I just kind of found myself after day 3, day 4, just getting cabin fever. I'd done every pub there was to visit. And so in a moment of boredom, I rang the local club and said, can I have a look around your stadium? They said, come on down. Clearly they were as bored as me, because they sent down their press guide to show me around, and he spoke with such passion, he spoke with such enthusiasm, that it kind of infected me a little, and he made me promise to come back when the season starts and you'll have a great time, blah blah blah, and I kept good to that promise. And the game itself, the attendance was terrible. It was less than 2,000. But I had a brilliant time. It was absolutely amazing, and there were no away fans. The stadium wasn't even 20% full, let's say, and yet I got absolutely hooked by the atmosphere. That small group of ultras of maybe like 300-400 that just kept up this incessant din throughout the game. I was in love, and straight away, I was like booking the next week's travel and the week after, and so straight away after that moment, that was me done. That was me back in the riding seat, let's say.
Before we get to what makes Polish fan culture distinct, what would you say describes Poland at this moment? So where are we entering this conversation a little bit? Historically, Poland is an EU member now, with a number of open questions about that relationship. But it described kind of the fork in the road that Polish football is in. where do you think the country is at right now? What kind of Poland would we meet if we were to travel there, in a nutshell?
I think that, personally, I fell in love with Poland the moment I came here. It was a very different country then, though, 23 years ago. And as I say, like Warsaw was a sleazy, dirty, gritty city. Nowadays, Warsaw is beautified greatly. It's a tall city with, it's a very Western looking city. And genuinely, when I go back to home, to Bristol, I kind of think that Warsaw has overtaken my own home city in terms of its let's say, maybe not affluence, but certainly in its sort of dynamism, in terms of its in terms of its optimism as well, in terms of its all these little things. You can feel this energy, and I think that goes across the board certainly in Poland's major cities. The country has developed at such a rapid rate. It's a different country from certainly when I was raised. We had the news flashes of a very grey Poland, of queues and of Lech Wałęsa shaking his fist and stuff like that. And nowadays, I think it's so westernized, and I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean that as a negative. It has gentrified a lot. It has, and again, I don't mean that in an overly negative way. There are negatives that you can draw from that, but I think that by and large, it's a very positive country. It's a very forward-thinking country. The great thing about Poland is that it's still also got this great respect for its past. It's got a great pride in its past, but the correct sort of pride. It's not a pride that kind of crosses, let's say, into badder things. At least not usually. I think it's a very forward-thinking country, and it's going places. I have no doubt that 10 years, 15 years time down the road, we're going to be talking about a major European player. I have no doubt about that.
It's historically a deeply Catholic country as well. What role does the church and religion play in daily life still?
Ooh, that really depends on the part of the country you're in. In Warsaw, you can, where I live, in Warsaw, you can live here and not even notice, but the further east you get, especially, you do sense that sort of that more conservative nature coming out, and certainly in the smaller rural communities as well, that plays a big part. But in the major cities, apart from seeing nuns on the streets and spectacular churches everywhere you look, you wouldn't really get the sense of this being a really like sort of devout conservative country. I certainly, maybe I'm inured to it. I think that maybe someone coming for the first time might think differently, but certainly as someone that's lived here for a long time, I don't notice that anymore.
Well, let's turn to football. The two great fan culture narratives of the last decade in Europe, I would say, is the rise of hooligan and casual fan culture in England and its influence throughout Europe, and then Italian ultra culture and its meteoric rise through stadiums all over the world and certainly continental Europe as well. Where along these two guideposts would you say that Polish fan culture fits? What makes it distinct? How have Polish fans appropriated what's going on in the rest of the continent? And what makes it stand out today?
I think that this is quite a challenging question, especially seeing as I say, like, I am no authority on other countries. What I will say is that, to understand the Polish fan culture is that while football has been around for a long time in Poland, the actual organized supporter scene was only born in the early 70s. I was reading actually for Legia Warsaw, who've got one of the most prominent fan groups, let's say, in Poland. Their movement, their organized fan movement, was only born in 1972, if I'm correct, when they were playing Feyenoord in the one of the European Cups. and they saw Feyenoord fans for the first time attired in their scarves and singing, and they were like, "Whoa, this is like someone's landed from space," and essentially that inspired them, and all of a sudden, other teams in Poland started copying them. So the supporter movement is very, very young in Poland in relative terms. When the Iron Curtain fell, when communism fell in '89, that was the next step really for Polish fan culture, to my knowledge. And that's when the hooliganism became especially bad in the '90s and the zeros. That was almost maybe golden years is the wrong word to describe that, but that was when the stadiums were like Agincourt or Braveheart, So those were the two key decades. In terms of where it stands between ultras and casuals, we don't do casuals in Poland. This is very much a British thing in Poland. You do get a couple of very, very small casual groups maybe, and you can certainly tell in the crowd who's lived in England and stuff like that just by their dress sense and stuff. But by and large, the ultra groups, they have their own specific dress codes, which favor the sporting wear. They favor the as in gym wear, not sports casual, but as in gym wear, for fighting. These are fighting clothes rather than something fancy from Italy that will get torn and So it's more related to maybe like the ultra model, the Italian ultra model. But as I say, I've got no real barometer of comparison between Italy because I've not been to Italian football.
Right. Well, sorry then for the next question, because I was going to ask you if my impression is correct, that on average, Polish ultra groups tend to be more, let's say, open toward physical activity on a larger scale, compared
Absolutely.
to, I would say, the ultra groups in Austria I grew up with, Germany. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that Poland has carved quite a big name on the hooligan league ladder, let's say, and I think that's utterly warranted. I think we saw last week or the week before when Legia turned up to Aston Villa, and I think the British police didn't know what had hit them, quite literally. So the Poles are incredibly active. It's developed the scene, however, in the way of the '90s and zeros were about the pitch battles inside the stadiums. Now we've moved more away from that due to improved police, due to the improved stadiums and stuff like that. But yeah, the violence still plays a massive role, and I think that one of the telling differences between the British scene and the Polish scene is that these guys are training for it. This is a 24/7 life. This is every one of them is a member of a MMA club or a gym, and these are the recruiting grounds even. It's not like England where you kind of turn up to a game, then you switch off after. This is a 24/7 lifestyle thing. You're training for it. You're genuinely, committing your life, your whole, your health. It's everything. It's so yeah. There's a huge difference in that sort of thing.
So, as that big male-dominated subculture in stadiums, is that visible outside of stadiums as well? You mentioned MMA clubs. What are kind of the tentacles that these fan groups have in their cities? How are they visible outside of the stadium? Before we actually,
I think they're incredibly visible. This is, the thing is, they can be invisible to the normal eye. You have to know what you're looking for. I think you can visit, for instance, Krakow is well known across the planet as being a beautiful city. It's Poland's Trump tourist card, let's say. But the football war there is absolutely vicious. But you would never, ever know that if you were a normal visitor. But it's notorious for its machete wars between the gangs and stuff like that resulted in several deaths. And there was even a person killed earlier in this season, I think, during actually a fan friendly. So it was this. You get the MMA clubs, you get a lot of organized criminality. This is where things have gone. The direction the ultra groups have gone, whereas in the '90s it was more about fighting at football. Nowadays, a lot have business interests that essentially, like, revolve around running the doors, racketeering, protection, smuggling humans, whatever, the whole gamut, forgery, etc. You talk about real drugs, especially, you talk about real serious crimes, and a lot of the groups have a very big concern in these. And this is where it's kind of quite funny when I speak to some of the older lads, and they kind of lament the old days. And back in my day, it was all about just a punch up at the football, and now, it's very, very serious, what's going on in the background. There's judges getting bombed or attacked or whatever. This is really serious stuff. It's not just about, it's not, as I say, it's not a hobby like in England where you turn up on a Saturday wearing your nice clothes and, have a pint with the lads in the pub, and then boom, it's over. Sunday, back to normal. This really is a 24/7 thing. This goes way beyond reasoning almost, and so and this has had a massive impact on the culture itself in terms of again, like a lot of the older boys I speak to lament the lack of young blood, let's say, coming through nowadays, and for very good reason. They say, like, when we were kids, it was part of our growing up, but now, this is a real, the penalties are so high. What these people are doing is so strange. Why bother if you're a kid? When you can learn a language and make loads of money. You don't have to go down this route of overt criminality. And that's unfortunately where Poland's football scene is kind of going.
Is that true then? That there seems to be a bit of a problem with younger kids, teenagers gravitating toward these fan groups because the stakes are so high. Is that
I think they're gravitating away. That's the problem for the fan scene, and so you're getting almost a stagnation where kids are aspirational, and rightly so. They see a better future than the one offered to the generation previous or the generation before that. So you're getting a real problem in terms of shrinking fan groups, but they're getting more and more vicious, and it's kind of a very confusing scene, and it's very tough to explain. But essentially, a lot of the older guys, they see their ultra group that they want to belong to or still belong to, and it's fewer kids are interested, and they themselves say, I'm not surprised. Kids have got better things to be doing.
Do you see that as a problem for Polish fan culture on the line? I mean, there's two pathways here. One is kind of the petrification, zilification of what is now, and emptier stadiums, or the turn toward very gentrified stadiums to bring the middle class, upwardly mobile middle class back, all-seaters, and push back on the ultra groups that you've outlined. Is one of these two narratives playing out?
There's a middle ground, basically, that Poland skips entirely. Poland's very good at skipping middle ground in general. It's either this or that, and this is kind of where we are right now. Where the fork in the road I speak about, it is. It's a physical thing almost. It's so divergent. And it's a puzzle. Like there are. You don't have to go this. You don't have to be all or nothing. And I think this is the problem with Poland, where essentially, because of various factors, people are going for the all or nothing option. And there's no there's no one power saying, "Ooh, let's draw things together. Maybe let's maybe think a little smarter about this." So there's this big divergence right now in the fan scene. And I think it is impacting a lot the general experience.
How has the construction of all these new stadiums, particularly around the European Championship, how has that impacted Poland, the football, the reputation of the football in the country? Because I look through your blog and I see pictures of beautiful stadiums, but fan cultures that seem like the odd bird out, that don't always fit the scenery. You look at the stadium and you expect this kind of gentrified middle class experience, but it's not. Am I seeing this right?
Beautiful. Yeah, I think you are right. Yeah, there's beautiful stadiums. I think that in England we've got great stadiums, but the atmosphere's died, to the point of almost embarrassment. If I'm honest. Whereas in Poland, we have retained the atmosphere, in spite of having the new build stadiums and such like in the higher leagues. I think I would credit that to the determination, resilience of the ultra movement, where they stand up and be counted. If a club suddenly jumps up prices and stuff like that, these guys are going to boycott, and they're not going to sing like "sack the board" like in England, and sit on their hands. They're actually not going to go to games. They will really make an effort to change things, and clubs will back down when a group takes collective action. And I think a great example of that, of collective action, came in the cup final 2 years ago, or last year, I think it was actually, when Lech Poznan were forbidden from bringing their flags into a cup final. So 30,000 of their fans simply did not enter. And that kind of gave the Football Association food for thought. When 30,000 people don't go in to the marquee game of the season, that makes you think a little. And I think this is the positive side of ultra culture. When they have this influence to say, no, we're not going to stand for bullshit, basically. And I think that's the real power of ultra culture. That's the positive side of it. And I think that's helped retain the atmosphere. That the clubs maybe live in fear of their fans. That's obviously not good, but there are positives in that the game has not been stolen yet, from the fans.
The lower leagues, where the shiny stadiums didn't arrive, show up on your blog quite a bit as well. And there are some spectacular, wonderful old stadiums on there too, and remarkable fan cultures as well. Is there a big gap between the extra class, the first league in Poland, and what happens below in terms of fan culture, in terms of significance for the town, or not?
Yes and no. I think one of the extraordinary things about Poland is this system of rivalries and alliances that you have going, and pretty much all of the lower, pretty much every club has some kind of close association with another club or several clubs, etc., etc. So just because you support a minnow, it doesn't mean you're going to be starved of success because, hey, your main team is the big team that's winning all the cups. It's this cat's cradle of alliances and rivalries that make Polish fencing such a intriguing thing, and that also means that that the fans that you find in a crap stadium are frequently going to be found in a different stadium down the road supporting the local giants, and the staggered nature of kickoff times, the staggered nature of kickoff days and stuff like that, dates, makes that very, very possible, so it's very, it's one big conundrum, really. I'm at a loss to accurately convey just how I'm confused speaking about this. I know.
So there's this crisscrossing set of alliances between not the clubs officially, but between the fan cultures of clubs who not just visit each other's games occasionally, but where there's proper alliances, people show up for each other in each other's stadiums. How do those come about normally? Do you know?
This was, pretty much this was born again I mentioned earlier that in the 70s, this is when the fan movements first started in Poland. These alliances started happening around that time as well. And I think many of them were forged around things like, basic concepts of my enemy's enemy is my best friend, that sort of thing. That's an oversimplification, but basically that kind of thing happened. And the way they have developed, however, has been quite strange, let's say, because these pacts get broken, and new pacts that have incredibly surprising get formed. A lot of the stuff now is very business oriented. As I mentioned earlier, there is this huge problem with organized criminality behind the scenes and stuff like that. So a lot of the pacts, the newer pacts that are being made, these are essentially people, figureheads from one city thinking, oh, actually, it'd be really beneficial to our underground business if we had friends in this city, etc., etc. So a lot of these are forming very nefariously almost, and everyone else essentially has to follow. Once you are told we're allied with this team, everyone else, well, every other player has to say, yeah, okay.
Does this run across historic geographic lines, along political lines, or more along random lines? The enemy of the enemy is my friend, that kind of thing.
And nowadays they run pretty much very strongly on these business grounds that I mentioned. These you're talking about that. Very logical decisions almost that are being made. But yeah, I think like when you go back like 30, 40 years and stuff like that, you'd have found, maybe political similarities, or maybe even things like, a mining town being connected to another mining town, or that sort of thing happening, so that there was maybe more of a logic then, but not that much logic, So, but nowadays, I think it's mainly the business interests that are kind of influencing the trajectory of these alliances.
The alliance is normally cross leagues, right? So it's from higher,
absolutely,
lower.
I mean, the alliances you have, you will have. You can have an alliance in. I'll use. Let me think of an example. I would maybe use Lech Poznan, they play in the top flight. They are a very well supported club. They have an alliance with Cracovia, who are also in the top flight. And they also have an alliance with LKS Łódź, who are also in the top flight. So you have three top flight teams that are all friends with each other.
This is the famous triad, right?
I get so confused about the actual Wielka triad, so it's called. I genuinely need a mental map almost, and each week I spend so much time going through who's rivals, who's not, and stuff like that, because some of them throw up very unlikely ones. And one recent-ish, is Widzew Łódź and Wisła Krakow, who 6 years ago they were responsible for one of the biggest riots of the decade, and now they're drinking together, they're friends together, they're fighting together. So it's incredibly baffling. It's I used the word cat's cradle earlier, but I think it's more accurate would be saying, like, one of those pictures you see of rats with their tails entwined. I know that's a horrible picture to have in your head, but it's just a mess. Really, I have no way of explaining it in a way that makes sense. Other than as someone that's not Polish, as someone that wasn't brought up with the Polish game, this is baffling. In England, you support your team, one team, that's it.
Yeah,
you might have a favourite other team, but that's it. Like in Poland, this is so weirdly stacked, and so you'll have teams that are friends with each other in top flight, but then they'll have stacks of teams that they're also allied with in different leagues, and it becomes almost a family tree where things spider off in different directions.
I thought the triad was Cracovia, Lech, and Arka.
That's right. Sorry, yes, yeah, you're right, yeah.
But I also read about friendship and international friendship here to Ajax Amsterdam and Cracovia.
And Cracovia,
might be too specific, but Cracovia is it's an interesting club. The ironic nickname of the Jews in the city. Maybe that's where the connection to Ajax Amsterdam comes from as well. And that Cracovia derby in itself is a fascinating, or must be a fascinating experience to attend. If you into one of those, how well do you know that city?
I have been to the Krakow derby. It's not what it once was. You know, and I think that the thing is, going to actual Polish football, if you're not looking for trouble, you're not going to find it, and you're going to have a fantastic time. You know, you're going to enjoy a brilliant show and an electric atmosphere in the stadium and stuff like that. Fundamentally, it's developed the top flights. It's the stadiums are very, very good. The police are incredibly efficient at what they do. They know all of the tricks in the book, and they're not afraid to get very, very physical to draw the lines. And it's very, very. It's a different experience, maybe the Krakow derby, as all of the big derbies are nowadays. You know, fundamentally, you're going to be very, very safe in the stadium unless you're an idiot yourself, you know, or unless you put yourself actively in the line of fire. So yeah, it's not quite what it once was, but off the pitch, outside the stadium, as I say, like Krakow has got a terrible reputation for machete wars, basically between Wisła and Cracovia, essentially raiding each other's estates, housing estates, or sending raiding parties to cover the graffiti in the city that delineates the front lines of the housing estates and such like. And it's, you know, that this has resulted in several murders and killings.
The split in that city is interesting too, because it is a bit of a carryover from history too, with Wisła being the preferred club under communist rule and Cracovia not. How much of the architecture of football is carried over from Cold War times into the present, in terms of this club is for the regime, this club belongs to this particular kind of state-run company or police, yada, yada, yada. How many of these structures are still in place? Because in East Germany, for example, you still feel some of that, particularly in inner city rivalries. Is that the same in Poland?
Possibly. You know, I think that the most salient example of this would be Legia Warsaw, who were the army club, and their fans still proudly consider themselves as the army club and stuff like that. They were definitely favoured heavily for the status as the army club during communist years. But that said, you know, no one really looks at them derogatorily for that. Maybe I think those who don't dislike Legia have different reasons to dislike Legia. You know, I think that there's you know, the whole this whole animosity towards them isn't so much about that, maybe, unless you're a Polonia Warsaw fan, in which case you have several reasons to dislike Legia and all that. But I think that in terms of the carryover from communism, it's very it's hard to note. I think there's I think the more the more important things that have driven rivalries maybe have been from the 90s, from the free market days, when Polish football just descended into a chaos of everyone being absolutely corrupt, you know, and it's crazy to see how many clubs have been relegated by 7 leagues or whatever, or have had to reinvent themselves from scratch, or have had to take over another club to still be alive or still exist. The whole the 90s really did impact the future, the current future of Polish football, and I think that many of the things that happened in the 90s continue to resonate to this day. I think that with communism, and I can't comment too much on this. I'm not an authority on that period of Polish football, but certainly from my perspective, from what I know, I would say that the 90s have carried more weight, maybe.
Okay. Well, that transition from state-run to completely anarchic marketplace in the 90s, and then European Championship, now the present. How has that influenced how clubs are run and the influence of fans on clubs? I've talked with various guests in this podcast about Germany's famed 50+1 model. So there's the kind of template for majority member ownership versus, in its most purest form, a British or American kind of ownership model. Where do Polish clubs fall along these lines, and how much actual influence do fans have on their clubs?
Fans have a huge amount of influence. I think that this is, again, I used the example of Lech Poznan not going into the cup final, their fans not going into the cup final a couple of years ago. And this is, that's a very clear-cut example of what the fans will do to make their voice heard. I think that the boycotts are so frequent. Arca Gdynia just finished a several-month boycott where literally everyone was not going. GKS Katowice had the same thing last year. These boycotts are so common. In England, if we're unhappy, we'll write an angry letter. It's very much the English character, whereas in Poland, no, I think they're used to downing tools and actually fighting for what they believe. I think maybe that's a carry on from communism.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this attitude from the fans of to be heard, they have to put themselves on the line. No one else is going to make change for them. It's down to them. So I think maybe that's an interesting carry on that I've not thought of myself.
What are these boycotts mostly about? So what change are fans trying to achieve? And do they also have a voting power in clubs to achieve them as well, in addition to boycotts? Or is like on the street, put your body on the line type of protest? Is that the way to go?
Absolutely, yeah. This is nothing official about it. This is the ultras having their say in sometimes quite a very threatening way. It depends. Some of these things are about ticket prices. Some of these things with GKS Katowice, if I'm correct, the club insisted that they had a riot against Widzew Łódź 2 seasons ago, and the club wanted the ultras to apologise for it, and the ultras refused to apologise for it. And basically, they came to loggerheads. This is a real oversimplification, incidentally, but essentially, the fans said, "Right, we're not going. We're not apologising for what happened. You can't make us all apologise. This wasn't on all of us. We're not going." And essentially, this kind of carried on and on and on. Very dangerous oversimplification on my behalf, but that's maybe the nuts and bolts of it. A lot of the protests are about sketchy ownership, about maybe not sketchy ownership, but let's say unambitious ownership or slack ownership, or what clubs perceive is wrong ownership models. They frequently, things can get set off for no reason whatsoever, and then just snowball from there. Often they're grounded in a club just not having success, and fans obviously demand the success follows. And so a lot of these, it's a confluence of factors often.
But the structure then is mostly that the club is owned by an individual or by an investors group and run top down, with the ultras kind of pushing from the bottom up, rather than voting participation of fans. Did I hear that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Is there any push among fans for member ownership? Is that a topic at all in Polish football?
Not really, no, and I don't think it needs to be. So as things stand, I think if that happened, that would take away the power of the ultras. So I think it's not in the ultras' interest to push for that when they already wield enough power. They already decide. They already make so many decisions. Maybe not in public, but certainly their influence in the boardroom can be felt, in some levels and stuff like that. So I don't think it's really in the interests of the organised groups to push for this more Western European model, as per Germany.
Are international investors looking at Polish clubs at all? If we think of the country, as you described earlier, as not a sleeping giant, but as a rising giant on the European stage, would football be the same? And might we have to contend with more issues such as multi-club ownership, international investors, etc., in the Polish league in the not so distant future?
Interesting question. I mean, personally, I think that if I was an international investor myself, I would say, what's the point? When you have such scant reward in Polish football, as I say, the actual football side of it simply isn't there. It's not like you're backing a winning horse here. It's still, and on top of that, when you have this sort of this ultra scene in the background, why bother? Why have the headache? That's not to say international investors haven't come along. I think Polonia Warsaw is owned by a Frenchman who basically studied in Warsaw and made a fortune subsequently in Warsaw, and took over the club. but he's very much, let's say, a maverick in terms of, he's the exception, not the rule. I think Wisła Krakow had a very interesting story a few years ago when an absolute cowboy came in from abroad. And
by absolute cowboy, people mostly mean Americans. Is that the case?
No. He was I can't remember from what country he was. I think he was from I'm trying to think, Malaysia or something like that. And essentially he was
okay.
he came in on it was such a ludicrous premise where he was promising the earth, and it turned out that he'd traveled into Krakow on a budget flight, and he couldn't even afford to pay his restaurant bill, etc. He was an absolute fraudster, essentially, and he very quickly got found out, but after all this song and dance, the savior's arriving, it quickly turned out he wasn't quite the knight in shining armor. I'm trying to think of other foreign owners. I can't think, there surely must be some in Poland, but I'm foxed if I can name them.
Wiadomo jak zakończy się akcja. W gazecie publikacja. Jedno i drugie to przypał na starcie. Najlepiej jest jak wszystko idzie na farcie. Akcja udana, jedna z ekip pokonana. Dla nich także należy się szacunek, bo bez tego by nie było naszych bujek. Awantury, awantury, awantury.
Maybe if a listener is now convinced that their next Europe football trip should be to the east and not to the big leagues in the west, and they were looking at Poland, how would you introduce them to maybe, let's say, the 5 most significant, most interesting fan cultures / places to watch a football game in Poland? What should the tour look like?
I mean, in fairness, this is a question I receive quite often. I'm always kind of a little bit flummoxed in terms. It's kind of like me asking someone, well, hey, what car should I get? It's kind of, well, do you like red? Do you like fast cars? Do you like big cars? And what's your budget? Et cetera, et cetera. There's so many considerations to take into play. But personally, I think if someone's starting from absolute scratch, it depends on what you want from the football experience. Quite a big club, I'd actually advise for a place like Lech Poznan. So I think that they're firstly, Poznan itself is a nice city, beautiful city, but the fan group there is very, very strong. It's got a lovely stadium, a modern stadium, but it's a traditional looking stadium, let's say. The atmosphere there is usually spot on, and you kind of get that bang for the buck. You have that trade-off where the city itself is great and the football scene is also great, whereas some cities maybe, that there's a bit of an imbalance, let's say. So I think in terms of consistency, Lech Poznan is a great starting platform. But personally,
it's also interesting, Poznan is because the stadium is huge, is modern. The club on the European stage is absolutely mediocre, if that.
Yeah, right.
And it has a huge attendance. It draws a huge crowd.
In terms of Poland, I think they're one of the one of the better supported clubs. I think when compared to Britain, attendance is still quite meager. But,
of course,
but yeah, that goes down. I think the thing with attendance in Poland in general, I always say to people, you have to apply the power of 10 to them. Polish lungs, I don't know what these people eat for breakfast or what, but it's 10 times the noise of an English stadium, So, there could be 5,000 people in a stadium. It'll sound like 50,000, And
is it the Polish beer, perhaps?
Yeah, well, the ironic thing is that there isn't much of a drinking culture around Polish football. As a Brit, I love my pre-match pints. It's I think most British football fans, the pre-match pub culture, post-match pub culture is an important part of the day. Whereas in Poland, this just doesn't really happen. Not to the same extent, not anywhere near to the same extent. And I think, again, going back to the ultra thing, most of the ultra groups will have a no drinking rule for away trips and stuff like that. You're there to support your club. You're not there to have to get hammered with your mates.
Actually, very, very sensible, and I'm familiar with that from ultra groups in other countries as well. Yeah,
right. I think just going back to where to go for the seminal Polish experience, I'd also recommend the whole Silesia area. This is definitely the beating heart of Polish football, and I think that you can throw a dart, and find something to do on a weekend there, and personally, I love Katowice, basing myself in Katowice, and then just finding, wow, so many games in the region. It's a great place, and I think as a region, it used to be quite grim. It's got this, a lot of coal industry, a lot of heavy industry there. And then obviously after the collapse of heavy industry, a lot of problems with poverty. But I think nowadays it's really shot up to become a very dynamic, interesting area. It's obviously still has social problems and stuff like that, but in general, very engaged, very interesting area to be in. And the football scene is crazy. And you've got a great mix of old, new, little, small. So if you're a hardy football traveller that doesn't mind jumping onto a train and stuff like that, you can have a wonderful Silesian safari that takes in several games over the course of one weekend and gives you a real broad scope of Poland, of the Polish fan scene and all that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, where Dortmund are, and Schalke, and tens of other professional clubs with long traditions, Silesia might be a bit of an equivalent in Poland. Exactly, it's a heavily industrial area with a long industrial past and just a very thick web of football culture and clubs.
Exactly. It's very similar in terms of like Lancashire in England as well. Yeah, where you have that sort of that history of heavy industry, especially coal mining, and all that, so to me, Silesia, it's just incredible. It's a very exciting area as well. As I say, it's got an emerging dynamism, but it still retains a real grit and authenticity, and etc. So it's a fascinating place to visit. You do get a feeling of maybe going to a little bit different Poland. I don't mean to say that in a disparaging manner, but it definitely feels a bit more raw than say the polished Krakow or polished Warsaw experience. So that Silesia in general, I can't sing the praises high enough for that.
So we've got Poznan, we've got Silesia. And where else? I mean, I think that with in terms, myself, I love doing the far-flung travels. For me, doing southeast Poland, I love it. It still remains a bit like I can't drive, so a lot of all of my transport relies on essentially a wing and a prayer. A lot of public transport connections and stuff like that. And southeast Poland can pose challenges at times, but the rewards are so high there. You've got a lot of small teams that are really they've been known to Poles, but for the international traveller, for the international football traveller, many of them would be very kind of surprising, maybe. But definitely, in terms of the stadiums itself or teams to watch, I love the town of Przemyśl. That's my poor pronunciation there, but that's right on the Ukrainian border almost. So it's you're really traveling hard to get there. But the two teams there play in spectacular stadiums in terms of evoking the romance of football, and both have very I wouldn't say large ultra followings, but good ultra followings, very high quality maybe. And so if you pick the right game in Przemyśl, you're going to have such an interesting time. So I'd highly recommend that. In the north of Poland,
I do like my visits to the Tri-City, i.e. Gdansk, Gdynia,
I was
Sopot.
wondering. I mean, that area with significant history in the transition of Poland,
Right.
the communist country, to the present as well. What is there in terms of football legacy?
There's some very interesting clubs there. I actually tend to avoid in general the bigger clubs and just go hunting out the really small, obscure clubs. One of my favourite derbies actually is very close to the Tri-City, that being Griff's Whoops against Pogoń Lemborg. That's and I say a small derby. The rivalry is very, very fierce, and the crowds are usually for a derby, they're 700, 800 people, and yet it can be crazy, the noise, the color, all that, it can get very, very intense. And I've had some spectacular trips to watch that rivalry firsthand. To me, that's one of my favorite fixtures in Poland, even, and obviously its proximity to such a wonderful city like Gdansk, really kind of pushes me to favor that.
Yeah, in the capital, is Legia as kind of a staple of Poland in European football?
Absolutely, I think
tourist friendly.
It's very, and Warsaw is a fantastic city. I'm always very hesitant, though, to recommend it, because I think Warsaw is very much an acquired taste. I've lived here for many, many years. I'm addicted to the city. I love it with a passion. But it's not a Krakow. It's not a Prague. It's not a face surface pretty city. It can be hard work in the summer. Fabulous, you can feel the vibe, you can feel the energy, but visit in the wrong weather, you're going to be thinking, oh my god. But in terms of football, Legia Warsaw is a world-class experience. I have to give them that. The football scene, however, in the city can feel very one-dimensional almost, though, in terms of the Legia's dominance is such that it's very hard to get a sense. I love my trips down to Polonia Warsaw, however, because they play in the sort of stadium I love, i.e. an antique, faded, dusty antique of a stadium. Their crowds are quite very modest compared to Legia, but again, on the right day, there is no such thing as a small club in Poland. So on the right day, a handful of fans can make a real an atmosphere to remember. And I've had some wonderful days days at Polonia. I've had wonderful days at Legia. I hate being drawn on which one I prefer, because I've got friends from both clubs and all that. But Warsaw's a very interesting one. And I think that the great thing about Polish football is that it's very easy if you play your cards right, or if your luck is in, that you'll find a weekend where both clubs in a city are playing at home the same day, and that's very hard to find in England. So in Poland, that's a real bonus. And Warsaw, I would really recommend. But yeah, I think it needs to be tempered with the fact that maybe the city might not be up to the same sort of expectations you might have of a more prettier city, let's say.
Yeah, and probably Krakow. And
Krakow is interesting. I think that the thing is with me, I'm almost jaded by Krakow. I've sort of the way I've. Okay. It was the city I first fell in love with in Poland and all that, but then having from my personal perspective, having seen it kind of go down the overtour of the mass touristed route, it's very frustrating to see when you remember through rose-tinted glasses the old days, but that's me being nostalgic. That's me being maybe a bit of a snob and saying, I remember the old days, so I'd take my advice there with a pinch of salt. Krakow's a fabulous city. It's world-class beauty. It is an A-list city, but with both clubs there, for me, I just prefer going to other places. That's not to knock it. I think that everyone needs to go to Krakow once in their life, and make their own minds up.
You're yourself torn a little bit between the nostalgia that you just described a little bit and being fascinated, I feel, by the fork in the road, as you called it, that Polish football is in.
Yeah.
If we were to look into the future, if I was to talk to you again in, let's say, 5 years, Where do you think the football in the country has gone and has developed?
I think in 5 years' time, I'll be very miserable. And I will be saying to you, it's all gone. I think I'll be kind of the hunched old man in the pub you see complaining bitterly about life and it's the way it's rolled.
Okay.
I think that Polish football is going so far down, is pursuing this model that I think is incorrect. I think that I think the municipalities, a lot of the football stadiums themselves are actually owned by municipalities rather than the clubs themselves. And a lot of these great, gorgeous stadiums being knocked down in favor of, essentially identikit things, for no real reason. I kind of want to shake people and say, look, you're not going to become Barcelona. You're not ever going to win anything. Promotion's a dream. And who's going to perform in this stadium? Beyonce. She ain't coming. Really, it's
Yeah.
it's kind of this. This unrealistic pursuit, and I think again, this actually is almost part of the Polish psyche. And I don't want to be disparaging to my host country that I love and adore, but I think after nearly 50 years of communism, you've seen this consumerism swallow people, and there's a real obsession with shiny new things, we call it in Poland. That applies also to football, where there's this real sort of attitude towards old stadiums where dark and dirty. You don't have the same sentimental attachment as you have in Britain. And there's this obsession that shiny and new means good. It means the future. It means success. It means prestige. And as a Brit, I'm kind of sitting there shaking my head and saying, no. Whoa, hold your horses here. You're going to regret it. And there's this blind rush towards this gentrification of football, the TV companies, the owners, etc. And they're kind of imagining, I'm not sure what they're imagining. I think they're living on a fantasy of seeing these stadiums full of this massive middle class that doesn't really exist to the same extent as to the same extent as Britain or other Western countries, let's say. So there's a lot of this sort of pie in the sky fantasy stuff going on with people who I don't think really are football people, and they're just kind of living on this this dream, that's actually going nowhere.
So if, dear listener, you were thinking about going to Poland, go now, right? Is that that's the moral of the story? Now is a good time to go still.
This is the message, tomorrow's too late, and this, to me, I'm fascinated, as you say, about this fork in the road. I am basically witnessing history firsthand. This is, it's amazing to be part of that. It's amazing to be documenting that in my photos and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm certain 5 years down the line, I'm going to be a very, very depressed person, and we'll just be living on my memories essentially. So yeah, this is really, the time is now. Now is too late. It's, so make it now, or otherwise, now already feels too late. But it's not technically. But hurry up.
Yeah. Hurry up. And if you want to find out more, or maybe plan something, where do people find your journalistic work when it comes to Polish football? The pictures, the imagery, but also your takes on it. Give your little plug.
You can find me. All right. You can find my website on www.alexweber.life and my Insta channel, which is Polski Football Culture.
Polski football culture, and there's two B's in the Weber, Webber, right, yeah. Life, and it has the Bristol bird in the website logo as well.
That's right, yeah. I hope there's not a copyright issue.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that.
That was my friend did my website for me, and I came up with it. I thought, I'm pretty sure there's whatever. Well, I'm pretty sure I won't be.
No one has complained yet, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good thing, though. Kind of. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for documenting what I think you really made clear is a historical moment and is living through history right now for those who hear about football as a culture. that undergirds a variety of other European and global cultures. And thank you very much for the time to chat as well. It was wonderful to get a little on the ground dive into a very particular Eastern European football culture.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Alex. Be well.
Cheers. Take care.
My sister studied in Poland for quite a few years, really loved it there, and I have not made it there. I do plan to. It's on the list for next year, and if that is so, maybe I'll meet one of you on the grounds there. I think Alex made a convincing case for why now is the time to go and see what is going on there. Please spread the word. Thank you so much for listening. This means a lot to me. Making this podcast means a lot of fun to me, but knowing you're listening and you're enjoying it does as well. So thank you very much. Spread the word, give this a rating, and I look forward to talking with and hearing from you next time. Be well.